Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and the system that would normally be getting fed today is the Vermibag Mini. I basically take any system that was fed, put it at the end of the line, and then eventually it works its way back to the beginning of the line. But the feeding this system got last time to commemorate its 700th day in service was so huge, I figured we'd give that system a little extra time before coming back to it. So the bins that we're checking in on today are our Buddy Red Wiggler bins, and you know, those systems are now over on the shelf over here. They had been over here previously, but they got shifted over after I made some space over here for them. The information board about the systems is right here, and the Buddy systems, Buddy bins, don't have the same age. The system over here, the November launch day, is the 230-day-old system. The slightly older system with the October launch day is the 273-day-old system. Once we get them up on the bench, the older system will be moved to the left of the camera frame. And basically the older system got fed 23 times so far, the younger 20 times so far. And that last check-in 13 days ago was the day that we decided to begin what we refer to around here as foraging, or more recently I've been referring to it as fed foraging, which really just means no new bedding, kind of letting the systems work down whatever bedding was in there. But I'm going to cheat a little bit, because this stuff over here is the material that I pulled out of my gutters. I did some gutter cleaning the other day, and then the stuff seems so nice, it's really just broken down leaves basically. But I ran a good bit of it through my screen, and I was able to almost fill up this entire bucket here. I've introduced this material already. I used a little bit of it when we fed the outdoor worm bag recently. I also used some of this material to build some bedding material that I'm going to use to launch a couple new systems. So we're going to kind of cheat and give them this stuff here along with their feeding of cucumbers. And we're just going to label it as food, even though it kind of looks and seems like bedding. And you know, just a little reminder, these are the systems with the gourds. Gourds that have been in here for over 200 days now. And as you can see, the seeds that came out of those gourds are really trying to grow. You know, let's get these systems up on the bench and get them fed. So let's get to work. Usually when my worm bins are getting fed cucumber, it's just the cucumber peels. Perhaps sometimes the end of the cucumber gets cut off, so you get a little chunk of cucumber. But in this case, what we have here is a whole big huge fat cucumber that I cut in half so that each system can get half of it. And there's a good bit of food here. So between that bedding slash food, I'm not going to call it bedding because technically we're foraging now for the past 13 days in these systems. That bedding, oh, there I go again, calling it bedding. That food, that leafy material that we're going to be giving them, combined with the cucumbers, I think is going to amount to a pretty nice helping for these little guys. And both of those materials, if you ask me, are going to be gone by the time we come in here again next time, whenever that may be. Although, you know, I don't have a lot of experience using that leafy material that that's going to be going in there as sort of the bedding slash food. That stuff that came out of my gutters. But I mean, for the most part, that's kind of partially broken down leafy matter already. It certainly has a head start on breaking down over just leaves that I bring in from outside normally. And I gotta tell you, there's a lot of growth in here. These systems, when they were still over on the other shelf, were close to the window, and these little seedlings must have sensed the sunlight nearby. We're trying to get a little piece of it. So let's just temporarily remove this stuff. This stuff really just now, at this point, becomes more food for them. But we're going to set it aside briefly until we can get to actually feeding these systems. This shredded cardboard over here is basically the stuff that they got as the bedding last time, their final helping of bedding, now that they're foraging. And I'm assuming that since it's down low beneath where we fed, a good bit of it is still going to remain, but we're not going to be attempting to keep it preserved. It'll just blend in as we work through this check-in and feeding. So besides the gourds, another slow composting item in here is this husk of a mango seed. And you know, at the pace at which these slow composting materials are breaking down, it does seem realistic to believe that the objects will just go with the worms to their new home when the time comes to harvest their castings and move them on. But you never know. Sometimes materials that are taking forever to get anywhere suddenly kick into high gear unexpectedly and then race to the finish line when the entire time you were expecting that it was going to take just short of forever to get there. So who knows, perhaps the gourds, even though they've been taking a really, really long time to get anywhere, perhaps they'll pick up speed and get broken down suddenly, even though we're expecting that they're probably just going to go with the worms to their new home at some point. And the material in here is really nice, I gotta say. Nice and loose and crumbly. So let's excavate the feeding zone over here in the younger bin. Here, the gourds that they were given were somewhat larger and thicker. Oh boy, that was fun. Their walls were much thicker material. So this particular gourd right here, I definitely expected it to take a much longer time than any of the other gourds that were used. And we get this every time, you know. The gourds are kind of hollow objects, and I always dump out the contents just like we did here. But the worms always like to crawl in and leave their castings behind within the gourds. So I'm sure they don't appreciate getting evicted every time the way I just did there. But sometimes when we do that, the amount of worm activity that gets ejected is pretty interesting to see. But it's not always the case. For whatever reason, there's always lots and lots of castings left behind. So for whatever reason, the worms either like the gourd because maybe it's tasty and they're slowly nibbling away at it, or maybe it's just something to do with the confined space that they enjoy being in. Couldn't tell you the exact reason, but it's always a popular spot in which we always find a good bit of worm activity. So let's get to feeding. The gourds typically just get returned back down into the feeding area. And here and there, some of these fragments of gourd kind of still holding together as a slightly larger object, but all I do is kind of press on it a little bit and it just crumbles. So that's really nice to see. It's just that this thicker stuff, I'm not expecting to see it get there very soon, but you know, I've been surprised from time to time in the worm bins with things happening a little bit more quickly than expected, so who knows. Let's not be such pessimists. Let's try to remain optimistic. You know, there's a mango seed husk in here. In the older system, I figured there'd be one in the younger system, and somehow it didn't surface. If there is one, then maybe we'll encounter it momentarily. Let's get to giving them their lovely feeding. So a lot of times I see people applying the bedding as a top coating to the food. Me here, I often lay down the bedding as kind of a foundation onto which we end up putting the food. But there I go again, calling it bedding. It's not bedding, so let's not even think about it that way. It's all food, but what we'll do with that broken down leafy material from my gutters is we'll sprinkle it over the top of the rest of the foods that they're getting. And as you can see, it's a pretty good portion. As you can see, it's not only cucumber, it looks like we got a chunk of tomato. 2 chunks of tomato snuck in here. So that's their little extra bonus snack for any of the worms that might feel like the monotony of getting a single type of food is not exactly what they were hoping for. So that's a pretty nice, generous feeding, a lot of which is just moisture content. Cucumbers are in large part just water, I believe. So let's leave it at that. All right, I think it's time to bring this check-in to a close because I'm pretty sure there's not a lot of remaining space on the camera to go much longer. So let's get the last of this food in here. Really nice material. Tiny, tiny particles. Since I screened it all, ran it through my sieve. And you know, I think we're going to try something here that we do occasionally, which is to not disturb the outer edges of the systems. Let's do that here today. Because usually we'll use the excuse of covering up the feeding zones to get out to the edges of the systems and till things up and stir things around, but once in a while I like to break the routine and just leave the outer edges undisturbed, and I think on this go around doing that here is probably something we could do in the interest of getting to the finish line a little bit quicker and letting these little guys get back to work. So all I'm interested in now is leveling things off over the feeding zones and throughout the rest of the bin, and we'll leave it at that. Back on can come our feeding zone indicators, holding up pretty good since we're not covering up with plastic here anymore for some time. So the stuff out on the surface remains kind of dry, and as a result of that, there's only limited worm activity, and that enables our feeding zone indicators to last and last and last for quite some time. So that's it for our buddy bins today. Getting sort of a feeding that, I don't know, it is foraging. Let's just treat it at that. All that leafy stuff was food here, but in most cases I'm going to treat it as bedding when I use it elsewhere. So I've got a few things to take care of getting cleaned up, put away. I'm not going to waste your time with that. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.